Okay, everybody, we're going to start today. If you haven't signed in, please do. There's going to be some really great information that we're going to be able to use here to do a better job with working with deaf and hard of hearing clients. And I wanted you all to know that, and some of you are the people who brought this up, but one of the reasons we're doing this for our cultural competency training this year is that we're really starting to see a need. We're having more people who are deaf of hard of hearing tell us that right off the bat, and that we need to try to help them find directions or figure out where they're going. We have some families in the different programs we've worked with that need interpretation services, and while we have some lists of interpreters and different kinds of things we can do, we aren't quite there yet. So as part of building our capacity to do this, we want this training for all members of our staff. And then we're also going to work on the other end at finding some maybe some language line interpretation services, so if somebody just walks in off the street, we can get some sign language interpretation in real time right away. We are doing a better job at figuring out how to work with sign language interpreters when we are building an ongoing relationship with clients. So we're working on it on multiple levels, but this is kind of the foundation and the bedrock for all the other work we're going to do. So thanks for being here. Great. And thank you, Carrie.
Yes, thank you, Robin. So my name is Carrie Kovacevic. My colleague Mary Morrison had asked me to apologize on her behalf. She's actually out on the road today, so she's not going to be able to be here. But her and I, we work for an organization called PEPNet, so it's Post-Secondary Education Program Networks, kind of a long name. But what we do is that we provide training and resources to professionals who work with deaf and hard of hearing students, as well as students themselves. We've got some great training modules for them. Ultimately, our mission is to improve the outcomes of the quality of life for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. So we do that by the resources and trainings and all that good stuff. We are federally funded through the U.S. Department of Education. Mary and I, we are housed here at the university, but we've got colleagues all across the United States. Our home base is in California State, CSUN, Northridge, California State Northridge. But we've got people on the far east, down south, Midwest. So it's kind of fun to work collaboratively and remotely, which is also a nice component. I was just saying I was on a video conference phone because we were setting up, or getting ready for a conference in July. It's a big one. So in order for us to have a meeting, we all have to pop up on the video phone because half of us are hearing, half of us are deaf. So we have to really work on accommodations for that. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and I love it. Okay, so here's the agenda for today. We're going to take a look at the demographics and distributions of deaf and hard of hearing individuals. We're going to be looking at the audiogram and taking a look at the medical perspective of hearing loss. We're also going to be talking about the ramp. Oftentimes when people say disability, you automatically think a ramp. Just put a ramp in the building. Access provided. That's not how we're going to be looking at it today. So if I could just ask you to kind of just mind shift for a little bit, and we're going to be talking about what it looks like to provide language access as a mode of a ramp. Lastly, we're going to take a look at what accommodations are available. So first, we've got how prevalent is hearing loss. So we've got 10% of the United States population has some sort of hearing loss. That's 28 million people, which is a good group of people. And of those 28 million, 65, or half of those are under the age of 65. So that's a big chunk. And for those who are 65 and older, 1 of 3 would have a hearing loss. So does anyone in this room, do you have anyone in your lives, or maybe yourselves, know somebody, grandparents, children, aunts, uncles that have a hearing loss? And there it is. Yes, it's very prevalent today, always. So we're going to take a look at how we're going to unpack what hearing loss looks like, how we can provide the appropriate accommodations. There's several different factors and components that you have to look at as an individual aspect rather than a deaf, hard of hearing label as a whole. So we're going to just unpack those together. So of those 28 million Americans, 95% of them are hard of hearing. They're hard of hearing, and we'll unpack this a little more when we go through the audiograms, but having any sort of hearing loss, you're missing some information. So it's important to recognize that you need to provide full access for language. So 4% are latent deaf. See the little d, mostly. We don't like to put anyone in a group. And then 1% is culturally deaf. So if someone walks into your office and they write deaf, I am deaf, capital D, they are telling you something right out the bat. They're telling you that they identify with a community, they identify with a culture, and they use a specific mode of communication, and that'll be ASL. So they are giving you a ton of information by just writing that big D. And if you have any questions in between this, let's definitely make this a dialogue, and we can ask questions anytime. Feel free to stop me. So again, we're going to look at different factors that are going to play into each individual person who has a hearing loss, because this isn't a cookie cutter solution. You're never going to find one accommodation that's going to work across the board. You're going to see an array of needs and services for each individual that comes into the office. So the first thing you want to look at is the degree of hearing loss. Again, we'll kind of take a deeper look once we look at the audiograms. But having a mild to moderate hearing loss compared to a profound hearing loss, they will look very differently as far as what those accommodations will look like. The age of onset is a critical component of this when looking at a deaf individual. Someone who's born deaf compared to someone who lost their hearing maybe at 7, 8, 20, 30 will look completely different. Because when you look at someone who is born deaf, and this it's a very unique situation, because a lot of times, let me ask this, how many do you think deaf individuals give birth to deaf babies? Do you think it's A, often, B, sometimes, C, rarely? Anyone know?
C.
It's C, rarely. So 7% of deaf individuals will have deaf babies, which means the other 93% deaf babies are born to hearing parents. Oftentimes, those hearing parents have no idea where to start. And they will go into the medical situation, they'll ask their doctor, and they will also, I think it depends a lot on where you live. If you grow up in Polson, Montana, or Livingston, Montana, you will probably have a little bit of a harder time getting the right path to the medical solution. Not as a solution, but advice, compared to if you grew up in Rochester, New York, or Fremont, California, where the deaf communities are thriving, and there's lots of access and lots of doctors who probably have seen it a few more times than maybe a doctor in Polson, Montana. But so when those hearing parents go into the doctor and be like, I've got a deaf child, what do I do? Oftentimes they'd be like, well, let's fix this, cochlear implant. Well, that's a whole nother training. Or they will say, don't worry, it's baby, you have time. That probably has to be the most detrimental answer you can hear. Because language acquisition, do we know what years it is that language is acquired by children?
0 to 2.
Yep, 0 to 2, 3, sometimes you'll see 4. So those years are critical. And so if those children aren't getting their language through here, which automatically goes up to here, it's that pathway to their cognitive strength and abilities, then they have to be getting it here. If it's not here, it's through here. Because either way, you have to start building that cognitive development for these children, and that is through language. So the age of onset is very important. If you're looking at someone who was born deaf, had very minimal language exposure for those first several years, compared to someone who lost it later, they have a full language already established, it's going to be different. Not even just for modes of communication, but cognitively. You're going to have two cognitively different groups of people, or individuals, whatever it may be. Cause of hearing loss is also another key factor. You want to know if it's something that's due to aging, Maybe it is genetics or trauma, maybe a one-time trauma or something that has occurred over a period of time. Maybe it was in their mama's belly, in the gestational period. I can't even say that word, even though I just went through it. So a lot of times they can get an infection, and that can have some serious effects on that unborn child, as well as infections out of the womb, and children can get sick and lose their hearing. Parents, we kind of touched on that a little bit. So 93% of the time, hearing parents have deaf children, which causes a whole different dynamic for that family. You have to really take a look at different options, as well as, and again, demographically, where we live is a big one. Educational background is also a very important one. So that child is either going to get mainstreamed in a public school with all of its hearing peers, or it can go to a residential deaf school, and it has access to language, direct communication, which is going to play a huge part in that child's learning. Can you imagine having, just having an interpreter follow you all around as a little kid? Like, little kids are intense. They're going to be like, who's this person with you constantly? Or, I mean, it just adds a whole different layer to that the childhood and their learning ability, especially when you have information going from one person to another. We all remember that telephone game, how many times you like, okay, I'm going to start and like see how it ends up. So you are always risking losing some key pieces of language and information. Robin?
I was just going to ask, do the sign language interpreters follow kids even like at recess and stuff to interact with other kids? Because that would affect...
Sure, yeah, that's the social aspect, yeah, which is, the social aspect is just as important as that is the in-class, educational. I think it might even be a little bit more important. I mean, kids are social beings. If they need to have that peer interaction. So yeah, that interpreter will follow them, which also makes it, it's a little hard. It's a little hard to be sitting down as a child, having, kid talk with an adult there. And we're like, is she gonna tell on us? So, it does. It changes the whole dynamic of the whole learning process for children. But then some distinguishing characteristics are all of these, quite honestly. Family members. I wish Mary was here because she has the best family dynamic ever. When I first met her, I would always ask questions because it was just so interesting. So her and I both grew up in Michigan, and her family is a good old Christian family. There's 8 kids. 4 of them were born hearing, 4 were born deaf. And so it was, and you ask their parents, they will say, thank God I had 4 hearing and 4 deaf, because could you imagine having 7 children and 1 hearing, their deaf child? How many people in that family would actually have learned sign language to communicate with that 1 deaf child? But instead, they all learned sign language. They all had to. I mean, in order to sit down in that family dinner and be able to communicate with half of their family, they needed to have that sign language in their family. They needed to be able to tell on each other, and, Mom, she stole my shirt. So they needed that. But oftentimes, you don't have that family dynamic of having half deaf, half hearing. Often it'll be that one individual who has the hearing loss. Do parents often learn sign language when they have a deaf child? Maybe, depending on where they live and if there's access to some educational courses for that family. Lastly, ties to the deaf community. And having a tie to the deaf community is very important for someone who's deaf and hearing. Just having role models, deaf role models, is very important. Just having a sense of community, stability, plays an important part of that emotional acceptance, and it goes a long way. But all of these will impact the modes of communication as well as the appropriate accommodations that will be necessary along the way. Any questions so far? No. The audiogram. Has anyone ever seen these before or worked with an audiogram? No? Never? Okay, a couple. Good. So this is the basic audiogram. We've got the decibels on this end, which is named after Alexander Graham Bell, who was actually trying to invent a hearing aid for his deaf wife. Got the telephone instead. So, look at that. Thank you. And then the top is the frequency, or otherwise the hertz. And then we can see all along the top here, this is what would be considered normal hearing. Anything that is 20 decibels to 0 would be considered normal hearing. We got our mild, immediate, moderate to profound. And we're going to be touching on all of those here. So this is the basic audiogram with language tied into it. So this is, you can see where all of the different sounds are found on the audiogram. So each word in the language have phonemes. Every phoneme in a word has different decibels and different frequencies. So if it's someone who has a mild loss, they're going to be missing out. They're not going to be able to hear the sounds. So they instantly, with a mild hearing loss, you're only getting part of the message. And then you'll see all of the other consonants and vowels that would be found. We've got the airplane here, so if you're profoundly deaf, maybe you can hear a jet engine. Maybe. These are just a few examples. And when I was studying in school, I got a nice analogy that kind of helped me along with understanding the audiogram. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. And when you've got perfect, normal hearing, you've got a jigsaw puzzle that can create a full picture. Let's say that jigsaw puzzle has 100,000 pieces. World go on. Okay, again, the normal hearing loss that you see, and the X and the O is just the left ear to the right ear. So they'll measure both of those. And then we have our classic speech banana, which were those sounds that I was just explaining about how you can hear the consonants and the vowels. Fa, fa, sa. So these are where all of those lie on the decibel frequency chart of the audiogram. Okay, so this is a mild loss. You can see where it drops down already. So look at all of these potential consonants and vowels that are missing. So here we've got, I don't know, maybe 80,000 parts to that jigsaw puzzle. So you're already missing a chunk of that big picture. And here we're having easy communication from 3 to 6 feet away. Other than that, you start losing more and more and more the further you go back. So if you're sitting in a classroom, if you're a deaf child sitting in a classroom, let's hope you're sitting in the front. What deaf kid, or what any child likes to sit in the front row? No one wants to sit in that back and go unnoticed. But in order to have easy communication at just a mild hearing loss, it needs to be 3 to 6 feet away. Let's see if I'm missing anything in my notes too. Sometimes I like to go off.
So how many kids do have mild hearing loss?
Here in...
Well, I mean, is there like kind of a general number of kids you can expect to have mild hearing loss, or is it really variable?
I think it varies. I mean, you know, Montana has a very low population as it is, so the deaf community is also rather small. I mean, here alone in Montana, if you're deaf or hard of hearing, you maybe have 20 to 25 people that you can communicate with. So I mean, and there is quite a few children who have, and you see more and more coming in to the school systems here. I should say here, not into the world in general. But yeah, I don't have a specific number for you. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, So the mild to moderate hearing loss, you can see that big dip. So the mild is, loses those low frequencies up here, where the moderate hearing starts dipping way down, and you miss all of those high frequency sounds. Those S's, mine are really sharp, so no one's hearing that if you got a hearing loss. But THs, those are very prominent in language. So you're missing, here you're probably, you probably got 30% missing of that jigsaw puzzle. Which I know if I was sitting in a classroom, let's say I was linguistics theories and I needed to graduate, I don't want to be missing 30% of what that professor is talking about. I don't think I would be able to graduate. Which, maybe this will be a good time to show you. If you have someone who has got a hearing loss, this is called an FM system. So what it does, I was wrestling with it earlier today, so I just want to make sure it's going to work. Check, 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 check. Oh, I do hear it. Oh, yeah. This is a fabulous little device because it just picks up. So if I'm in a classroom and I've got a hearing loss and I've got a hearing aid in, which hearing aids, they're nice, but they also pick up all the outside noise. So they're not just picking up that speaker's voice, they're picking up if someone's cutting the lawn outside, if the fan is going, it's picking up all of those outside voices. Whereas this one, try not to talk so loud and have it hurt your ears. This one, just have the professor hook this on, easy peasy. And then this one hooks right into your ear, and it is a direct amplification into the ear. Sorry, am I talking too loud? Okay. Yeah, just go ahead and pass that around. I'll keep this on. Oh, and all of these audiograms, they are unaided tests. So there's no FM systems or there's no hearing aids when they're taking this. And it's also in a very controlled environment. It's in a little quiet room. There's no people talking in other parts of the room, or, like I said, other fans or any of that. So makes it maybe easier to hear exactly what's going on. Moderate. That speech banana is pretty much gone. So here we've got maybe 50% of that big jigsaw puzzle. So this hearing loss is missing so much of that speech banana that a person can, it's hard to just, like, that speech discrimination is difficult to hear what is, you can tell that someone is talking, but what is being said is not. So, yes, there we go, I'm so sorry. So you can tell that someone is talking, but it's mumbled, it's jumbled, unless you're looking straight at the person. It's hard to tell what's being said. Okay, so now we have the severe to profound. Wait, there's that jet engine playing. So this person, hearing aids may help, but then again, they may not even touch the problem. A lot of times, this is where the sign language must come in. Because with a severe to profound, you're maybe getting 20% of that big picture. So it's not coming in here. It has to come in here.
So the device would not really help those profound?
I hate to generalize because there are some that could possibly. So what's nice about this too is that if you have a hearing aid, it's called a T-switch. So it's the back of the ear molds, and you can flip a switch and then put the FM system right into that. So then you've got the ear mold that is directly in your ear, so it's not just kind of like hanging off and bobbling around like that earpiece was. So, I mean, it could maybe take that 20% and bump it up a little bit, but 9 times out of 10, there needs to be another accommodation that's going to be accompanying this. This one's good for big lecture halls as well. Although I think about my husband's grandma. She, bless her heart, she is probably 85, and she definitely has a hearing loss. She will admit it. I don't think she admits the severity of it. She would like to go get hearing aids, but unfortunately, insurance doesn't want to pay for hearing aids, which is a crime and a shame. And so she goes without, but oftentimes and she loves to entertain, loves it. And it's so old fashioned. They have dinner at the dinner table, and then coffee and dessert out in the garden area. And so she's very old school. But I will watch her as we're all interacting as a family, and someone will tell a joke, and everyone's laughing, and she'll look around. Oh, it's time to laugh. It's time to laugh. Something's funny. So it's well, we also have this little device. So instead of sticking that ear mold in, you can plug this one in, and you can just set it in the middle of the table, and it'll pick up several voices rather than just mine. So I would take this one off, and I would clip this one into here, and then pick up a couple. So I think Grams needs to try this one. Maybe I feel like she's missing out a lot. I mean, she is missing out on a lot of language, but not only the language, but the social aspect, and just having that connectivity with her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. It's all, yes.
So are these devices covered by insurance? You said hearing aid, no.
I don't believe that these ones are either. Go ahead, Robin.
I was just gonna ask how much they are, because I can see, I think you could all see.
I think that you would probably benefit having this in your office. These are roughly anywhere between $400 to $500. Dramatically lower than what a hearing aids would cost, which would be so nice to have these in the office. If someone says, well, I've got a hearing loss, you can kind of pick their brain a little bit and see what kind of hearing loss we're looking at, and hey, we've got these really cool devices that we just got. We'd love to have you try them, and hopefully they would be taking to it and make life more accessible, which is the point. Okay, so any questions on the audiograms? Kind of straightforward. The audiograms don't necessarily address the complexity of the impact. Like we were talking about, it's not just about what is being said. It's more about what's not being heard, or what kind of social aspect you're missing of this, or the emotional connection that you're lacking because you don't get to hear what is being said. So the audiogram it's just a kind of a broad picture. So I got 2 my cabbage choice. What one does not hear plays a larger part in defining what the hearing experience than what is heard. Gosh, I already said all this. So again, access to family and friends and school is it's our livelihood. It's what us humans need, those human connections in order to develop cognitively, emotionally, academically. They all are tied in together. So here, let's say you've got 60,000 pieces of that puzzle, of that jigsaw puzzle that I was talking about. Can you imagine? Is this any way to learn? I mean, when someone's getting this, they don't have that chance to think deeply, to internalize what's being said. All they're focusing on is what is being said. What is being said? They don't have that chance to be like, oh, well, I think on a deeper level that X, Y, and Z is going to happen because of this. You're not getting that. All you're trying to do is swim and stay above water and stay with that conversation that is happening. Can anyone read that? This is what it says. So it is. It's a very big, you're missing a lot of the information. It's hard to even put into a concept what's being said when you are missing all of those consonants and vowels. Moving on. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We want the big picture when we're getting language. We want all of it and some. We don't want to be getting just parts here, a little bit here, a little bit there. Deaf people deserve to have full access to language, just as all their hearing peers. So some of the impacts that hearing loss can have. It causes delay in development, both receptively and expressively. So language is a two-way street, always, whether it's verbally. For someone who's deaf and hard of hearing, they need to be getting it here, and they also need to be giving it here. You know, they deserve to have a two-way conversation, just like we do. You know, they want to take the information out, they also have to be able to give information back. Language deficits cause learning problems, and as a result, it reduces in academic achievement. This is why PepNet is still funded. This is what we are ultimately trying to break down barriers, especially in the post-secondary education. It's still really kind of surprising on how much lack of knowledge there is with deaf and hard of hearing. We are accessible to all professionals who work with deaf and hard of hearing, VR. We've got a lot of stakeholder groups, and we get lots of questions. Who's going to pay for the interpreter? Who's going to pay for these services? Do I really have to provide anything that this deaf individual needs? Yes, yes, yes. You do have to provide it. It's part of their rights. But so yeah, we are trying to, as PepNet, we're trying to increase the amount of deaf and hard of hearing students who graduate from post-secondary education. It's incredible to see the reading levels of deaf and hard of hearing students. A lot of times they will go through the system of high school and leave with only a 4th grade reading level. So to compete with their hearing peers in the post-secondary arena with a 4th grade hearing level, it's tough. Well, and it also stems back to why language access exposure from early on is critical. Because if you have a child who doesn't have language for the first year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on when the hearing loss is identified, it's rarely do they catch up. It's hard to catch up. It's almost impossible to catch up on those critical years of language when they first. I'm sure most of us have kids in this room. Do you have to teach your children language? Like when they're growing up, do you teach them? Or do they just pick up? They, yes, I will sit there and read a book. This is an apple. But there is so much more language acquisition that goes on with just them watching, listening, not even having to teach that language. So to have a deaf child who doesn't get that language exposure from their mom and dad, their brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, all that language exposure that hearing children have, it impacts that deaf child and not having that ability to have full language access. And I think about my youngest daughter when she was a baby, and I'm teaching I've got a 2.5-year-old and a 7-month-old. So when the 2.5-year-old was just a baby, I'd teach her sign language, and I'd teach her sign language. She do more and more, and mom, dad, she do water, and they're watching little tiny hands sign is adorable. But they don't have, but just like how children don't have their language correct, like she would sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but it was Drinkle, Drinkle, Little Star. But she'd also do water, water, even though the real sign is water. They learned that later, but she would do water, water. But then once she would hear that language. I taught her. I would teach her sign language, but then she was just automatically picking up what we were saying, what was heard, and her language development just skyrocketed. And you're just, it's incredible. You know, she was singing her little Drinkle Drinkle when she was a little over a year. And it's like, wait, how do you know all these words already? So it's incredible to see how much language doesn't need to be taught, but still is acquired when you've got it constantly flowing in. Does that make sense? Okay, so communications difficulties often lead to social isolation and poor self-concept. A lot of times you'll see deaf people will say, well, I'm not smart enough. Just because they didn't hear something does not mean they are not smart enough. But they will often have that time, especially if they have to keep asking, can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? And that hearing person's like, what is going on? And then just be like, you know, they automatically start feeling a poor self-reflection of themselves. And like I said earlier, maybe if you're in Missoula, you've got maybe 25 people that you can talk to. So that's isolating. You know, that's you don't have access to just go up to your favorite buddy at school, you know, especially if the interpreter's not there or whatever it may be. Language is not at your fingertips when you're deaf and hard of hearing. So it leads to several issues. And all of these will impact vocational choices.
Question?
Sure.
So when a child, a hearing child can learn language from 0 on, what age group what age does a hearing impaired child really start to be taught?
They can learn from the very beginning too. From the very beginning. You'll see little deaf babies who have that exposure, you know, if they've got deaf parents or whatever, as long as they have language exposure, doesn't matter where it comes from, you'll see them start babbling with their hands, and then you see those babbles start becoming more fluent signs, you know, it becomes water, and then it becomes water. But yeah, they as long as they are getting it here, they can start picking it up just as quick. Yeah. I mean, and I think of my daughter. She was producing her first signs when she was probably 3 to 4 months old. That was 2.5 years ago. It seems like forever. No, I can never remember. But they start picking it up quickly. That's why it's so important to just identify that hearing loss as quickly as possible. You know, it's nice that they do those hearing tests in the hospital these days. You know, before it was required to do that, sometimes children wouldn't get identified until they were in school, in the 5th grade or in the kindergarten, 5 years old. 5 years old, and they already lost such a chunk of information of life and language. And it's so hard for them to catch up after that. Language. I love language. So here is the basic pyramid. We've got language, the form, content, use. Got the syntax, morphology, phonology, which is the form of language, the semantics, which is the content. And then we've got the pragmatics, the use. One of my favorite classes when I was going to school, I got a degree in sign language. One of my favorite classes was a linguistics class, and it was so interesting, not only for the content of the class, but I had this deaf, big D professor who was teaching us English linguistics and ASL linguistics all in sign language. So I just remember her having to use her classifiers to show the teeth and where that tongue needs to be on the roof of your mouth at all points, and when amazing. Like, it's still stuck in my brain. I can remember that from 6 years ago, but I can't remember when my child made her first sign. So, you know, you pick what you want to remember in language. But the uses are extraordinary. We have so many different uses that we have in language. And if you think about not only how you talk to your coworkers and how you can shift how you talk, and you change it and you talk to, or let's say you have a coworker and also a friend, maybe you interact with them a little bit differently when you're in the office versus when you're, at dinner having a glass of wine. You shift those all the time. Or think about if you're writing an email trying to persuade someone perhaps. How many times you can backspace and be like, wait, let me just change the way I phrase this, so then maybe the outcome will be in my favor more. So it's just interesting how we can always manipulate our language to get what we want. I mean, we can use it to be persuasive, we can use it to convince someone, we can use it to be manipulative or sneaky. There's just so many uses of it. One of the big examples is in the English language also is the word run. The word run in the English language has hundreds of meanings. So it's always like, for an interpreter who is going to be changing the English language into ASL, you have to really take the content and then turn it into the pragmatics to make it fit. So, like the English word run, you can say, my nose is running, but you have to make that sign fit. So it's not, I'm going to run around the block. You're not going to say my nose is running, because that would make absolutely no sense to that deaf person. So you really have to use the content of that word choice and make it into the useful pragmatics. Any questions so far? The Bloom's taxonomy. So we've got the pyramid, which the base knowledge. In order for you to have a full understanding, you have to have the knowledge of what is being said. And then you have to be able to apply it, analyze it, synthesize it, and evaluate it. This happens pretty much automatically in our brains. We're just constantly using the Bloom's taxonomy. But for someone who is deaf and hard of hearing, if they don't have that knowledge of what's being said, they're not going to be able to understand it. They're not going to be able to apply it. They're not going to be able to have this automatic response that goes on in our brain with everything. I mean, it could be from as simple as, what would you like for dinner tonight, to what do you think the concept of evolution is to you, or so it goes for everything. So, communication access. It's very important to take all of those factors that we looked at before for differentiating deaf and hard of hearing, and really determine what is the preferred mode of communication. The easiest way to do it is ask that consumer, what is your preferred mode of communication? Because you're going to see it all different. You will have people that walk into your office and say, I prefer to write notes back and forth. I want an interpreter. We can just read lips. It's going to be, you're going to see it all. But the most important thing is that it should be in real time. Real time is critical. You need to have the ability to exchange information back and forth, having it, seeing each other's faces. About 70% of ASL is all on the face. It's all of the grammar. You can tell if someone is saying a yes/no question, even if they don't say yes, no, just by what's on their face. You must have both an expressive component and a receptive component. Again, language is a two-way street. So if a deaf person comes in, they have to be able to take your information in, as well as receive and give feedback back to you. You gotta, and it's important to make sure that all the information that you're giving is being understood. I highly recommend never asking the deaf person, did you understand that? Because it's so easy for them, and they probably from the very beginning, yeah, that was fine, I got it. Don't ever ask yes, no questions, because a lot of times it's just the easy way for them to be like, yep, let's just move on. we got it. And that probably stems from, being young and not wanting to rock the boat and having people repeat themselves. But there's other ways, you can be like, can you tell me exactly what you need from what the conversation we just had? You can understand. Must provide full participation. Again, having that expressive and receptive component, that back and forth, feedback from each other. And you must provide this for their civil rights. Yes, Robin?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out something that came up in the last class.
Mhm.
Where I guess, I think it was WIC has before had people who, they're saying their preferred mode of communication is to have their 9-year-old.
Oh, gosh, thank
interpret for
you.
them.
Yes.
It sounds like that is a really bad idea.
Yes, thank you, Robin. It is always a very bad idea to have any sort of family member, whether it's their 9-year-old come in and say, oh, they can interpret for me, or the 9-year-old who's deaf having their parents interpret for them. It's just a conflict of interest. You don't want your husbands to be interpreting for you. A lot of times they just want to tell you what you want to hear anyways, so you don't. It's just a very big conflict of interest, and it's not the ethical way to go about this.
What if they say that's my preferred way? Like, I don't mean.
Well, you can.
Understand, like, not having, bringing the child, having them miss school to be the interpreter, that is, I bet, I mean, it's,
Well, oh yeah.
I'm gonna answer for that just because we talked about it a little at the last meeting, and it seems like that's kind of the burden there is on the organization to be like, that's just not how we do things. We wanna do it the ethical way. You might prefer that, we totally understand that.
Yeah.
But we really can't do that.
Yeah,
You know?
which is the perfect way to go about it, because really you don't want to have that on your, having a 9-year-old interpret what you have to say to the adult, like it can just cause more problems than do good. Any other questions?
so we're not really respecting their preferred way then? That is it, so we're always just calling in a.
Well,
interpreter?
well, you can, it'd be like, we would love to have some interpretation services provided to you. We've got a list of qualified interpreters.
Yeah.
I think having a certified, qualified interpreter is probably not probably, it is the best way to go about giving full access. Because again, like, going back to that Bloom's taxonomy, how is that 9-year-old gonna have full knowledge of the content that's being discussed, whatever it may be? I mean, his toolbox, it's small as far as language goes and their knowledge ability. So it's almost impossible for them to get what needs to be said.
And Debbie, I think that's where it's still our organizational burden then too, to have multiple ways. It's like, yes, you can write notes, yes, we could get language line, to be on a computer screen, or here's a range of interpreters we have, to offer multiple. And so that's gonna be, I think, our thing to figure out, or we have Google boxes if that helps you.
And it's, you just say, I think having a certified interpreter would be more beneficial for you. Push for those certified interpreters.
I wonder if that's different between the departments, kind of, because I can't imagine working in environmental health, trying to get somebody a permit or explain something on their property, and not using a spouse as an interpreter. It's not medical information, and it's not privileged information. It's about rules and laws, and if somebody was hard of hearing and a spouse was right there, I don't know.
Yeah.
Those are things we'll have to wrangle with, I think.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. Would you agree? Because in that case, I think the spouse would have the same level of understanding.
Right, it's not privileged, it's an adult, it's public information.
Yeah. Nobody knows what I'm
I
talking
mean, it's
about.
basically coming up to the counter.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Well, and Mary and I, we were talking about how, everything evolves, especially technology. And this FM system, they have some where if you are at a desk and you come up, and if a deaf and hard of hearing person comes up and they've got one of those T switches, you can turn it on and it automatically amplifies in their ear. And so you can start communicating with this amplification at your not your fingertips, but at maybe your tippy toes. So, I mean, there are different ways, but I can understand what you're saying. If it's something that's like a quick interaction, you know, to call in an interpreter. Oh, you guys have some sticky ethical situations that can come up. But again, if, you know, preferred mode, if they are okay with that.
We can always offer, but
Yeah.
in that situation, if they refuse, we're not gonna send them away. Make it work.
And there's a difference between having an interpreter and having somebody there for support, right? So they could still, you know, if they prefer to have somebody with them for support, just like emotional support or something, right? So you wouldn't need to say, no, you can't have that person there with you.
Oh,
To
yeah, we
interpret.
would never say.
Right.
I can't
Right.
imagine that ever being the response, but in order to get that person information or to assist that person with what's required of them or what they need to give to us, it just would seem totally reasonable. I mean, it's an interaction at a public front counter. It just would
Mhm.
seem like that would be not unethical at all. And because we're not asking them for.
I know, is there like any
personal,
like,
private information.
and then like nothing like legally binding or anything?
Well, that's not true. I mean,
Okay.
Some.
See,
some
so then
cases
that's when it can
complication,
become
so-
sticky in those situations. Like if you're dealing with something that's legally binding, and let's say, like especially in court situations, if you're in a court or like having something legally binding, it's something doesn't go your way.
Mhm.
How easy would it be to say, well, I didn't understand. I didn't understand the interpretation.
That's something that we-
So that's why it's always nice to have someone there that's certified and has those requirements under there, so you can at least have that kind of backup, maybe.
I think it's really important to understand too that with the spouse thing, it doesn't come necessarily from like, oh, we don't trust you, we don't, you know, but it's how unbiased can a spouse be?
Mhm.
Like you need an interpreter to be completely unbiased, completely just get the information out, that's it. Spouses tend to be biased.
Exactly. You know, if the husband is going towards one way, you give two options, he doesn't like that second option, how easy would it for him to be like, oh, she told me, it's the only way.
As long as he owns the property.
You know, it could, yeah. It's- Yeah, so there are some, you know, I suggest always, whenever you can, offering like an interpreter or some sort of access that will give them A, non-biased, B, some certified person that can provide that information. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about, from my personal experience, I have a cousin I grew up with who was deaf, and my aunt became a certified interpreter. But my aunt was always an advocate where she wanted them to provide. Wherever she was at, she's like, I just remember growing up and hearing her saying, it's the law, they need to
Yes.
provide someone for my daughter. Like, she wasn't necessarily wanting to do it, and if she did, she would be like, they have to pay me, even though I am the parent.
Absolutely.
But she preferred whomever.
Yeah.
She just said legally they have to provide this service for my child. And I just remember her advocating that.
Which is
and
great.
That's just what I've experienced.
It's
So
wonderful
I-
because it is that deaf or hard of hearing person's right to have any access to language that a hearing person can have. So if they walk into, you know, if they go to a musical performance or any sort of public place, then yes, an interpreter has to be provided. It is legally required for them to have an interpreter there. And it's not the responsibility of that deaf or hard of hearing person, it's that establishment's responsibility.
It also kind of shows that there are people who would prefer to have someone from the outside versus a family member, as you were saying.
Absolutely.
At least through my experience.
Especially, you know, like, I know every circumstance is different, but, you know, if you're at the doctor's office, do you really want, like, your mom or your husband to be interpreting for your medical decisions? Like, that is your decision. That is, you know, because you do have that bias part that comes into them. Maybe it's, you know, out of the most loving part of their soul, but it just naturally comes into there. And so it's nice to have someone who'll be a complete third party, who'll just sit back there, give that information out as it's coming, facilitate that that language exchange without any connection to it. It's important. Great questions, great talk. Any other ones so far? No? All right, so now we're going to talk about some accommodations, as we already kind of jumped into that. Lip reading. That's a sticky one. We're gonna move on, and I'll show you a clip soon. We got hearing aids and FM systems, as this one I was talking about. We got the ones with the T-switch, and it's been so nice because, you know, like I said before, like if you're in a big lecture hall, how easy is this to put on a professor? You know, it doesn't tie me down, doesn't restrict anything, and it gives some access. And a lot of those big lecture halls these days have a looping system, so you can just plug right into the loop and have that direct information coming right into your earbuds. Speech to text options. We got some real-time, C-print, typewell. We'll touch on a little bit of those in a minute too. And interpreter. It's got oral, tactile, cued speech, certified deaf interpreter, ASL interpreter. Loads of different possibilities. So there are always some myths and misconceptions when it comes to people when they say reading lips, or these are some of my favorites. Oh, you heard me pretty good, so you should be able to hear, right? Your hearing aids fix it. But really, reading lips is a very hard task, especially if you don't have any pre-existing language. You know, if you were born deaf and you've got zero language coming in through your ears, how are you going to read what is being said on someone's lips? It's hard, it's exhausting, and it just takes a lot of energy to concentrate on someone's lips, especially if they mumble, or if they talk really quiet, or if they turn away and they're like, oh, it's next to impossible to be able to read the lips. If they've got a beard, there's so many things. And if someone comes in and says, no, I prefer lip reading, you have to, don't exaggerate, don't talk loudly. It makes things just a little bit harder. Just make sure there's good diction on your lips. You know, just want to talk slowly. If you pull them aside, you have to put them in a nice, small, quiet, close-ranged area to have that conversation. Always ask, don't ask, did you understand? But always ask questions that would get to make sure that they were understanding what was being said. But lip reading is very, very difficult. Oh, and here is an example. That mouse is very touchy.
So when I was really young, probably kindergarten or first grade, I have a much older brother, and we'd go out to recess, and there was this older guy, he might have been in like 5th or 6th grade, that always used to pick on him. And I didn't really know what to do about it. I was told what happened.
Today we went to a high school and I pet and shows and
I was posing for a picture with all of my girlfriends, when all of a sudden one of them leaned forward.
Can you read my lips? Can you read?
Can you read my lips? Can you read her lips?
I got Clementine loves bread. She stole a loaf off the counter.
Can you read his lips?
I have 2 dogs, one boxer, she's 7.5, and one mixed breed, who's 8.
I am deaf. That's my word. It's a hearing one. I rely on the visual, not the auditory. The word lip reading implies reading like reading a book,
whose text is legible and clear.
but the human face isn't a book, and the reading isn't reading. People mumble, people talk fast, they laugh loudly, people have facial hair like crooked eyes, lips like stickers, people cover their mouths, people have accents. But real conversations don't take place in the studio. I'm putting together a puzzle without all the pieces. I look in on your mouth. I try to grasp with one sense information intended for another. There have been times when I've questioned why I even tried to read, to wade through the swamp, when I could just use sign language. Some deaf people choose to do just that. It's like a different world. A world filled with rich expression and culture. When people sound, they come alive. But I know I want both worlds. Communication is never a given.
Tuesday, I woke up, had a rash.
She just pulled my dress down.
When I was little, my family got a cat.
Wednesday just hit him in the face. That was like the last thing that I ever.
Guinea
Last
pig.
winter I learned how to ski. I only cried twice.
But when the reading works, when I focus on one natural face and launch into a conversation, something clicks. Like then, I feel something extraordinary.
As human connection.
So that gave a nice little, oh, I have to exit out of here because I don't know how to work it otherwise. So it was a nice little clip to show how fun lip reading can be, or how difficult. Any questions on what you just saw? Great. So here we got the hearing aids, kind of touched on it, and this is the behind the ear one with the T switch. So then these are the ones that if you wanted to hook into that FM system, you gotta switch it back there. And there's different kinds. Again, I think we've already touched on this, but hearing aids, they will amplify all the sounds. It doesn't just take that speaker's voice and amplify it. It takes all the noises. So that also can be pretty exhausting. I know if you know people who are deaf and hearing, they sometimes just take it out. They're like, I can't do it anymore. It's too loud. You go to restaurants, some of these places in town, I couldn't even imagine wearing a hearing aid. It's loud for me, who I don't have any amplification going on in my brain. And so it's just, it can be a lot. So here's different. The speaker sends the sounds to the eardrums. So that's what you see in there in the mold. Basic. The listening devices. So we've got the FM system. So that amplifies just the speaker's voice, it will help in so many different situations. I'm really pushing for you guys to get some. I think it would be extraordinary if you had those available to some deaf and hard of hearing clients. Why aren't hearing aids enough? Because they just help amplify. It doesn't mean you have a hearing aid, you're getting all of the language, you're getting all of the content that is being said. It's not a perfect fix. What the assisted listening devices do, they amplify sound for the speech vehicle. So this one is like this is like the signal to noise ratio. So if you have the signal, which is the voice and the speech and the sound, to all the outside noise. So it can be so distracting when you are trying, well, and like that video, you know, when you're out at a club, you know, you can't just have a conversation because the noise ratio is obscene. And life doesn't happen in a studio. So there's things that you, and again, if you have a deaf and hard of hearing person who comes in, it's very considerate to keep a nice, quiet environment, if at all possible. I know it's not always, but it is good to reduce that noise, that signal to noise ratio. This is what perfect hearing looks like. This is what impaired hearing looks like. So hearing aids, they just have this all sounds. They don't grow the new hair cells. The hair cells is what pushes those sounds into the cochlea. So you're not going to be growing new hair cells by getting some hearing aids. I got trendy and hashtag amplify. Here's some speech to text options. We've got CART, which is the same concept of what they use in the court systems. So it's the communication access real time. The verbatim and accuracy is really high on those. So when that happens, they're not typing word for word. They're doing a phonetic combination. So it's quickly to put out all of the language that's coming in. All of these are required training. Lots of training, actually. They're very difficult to do. So it's not like you can just pull someone off the street and say, "Hey, can you go ahead and type whatever I'm going to say?" It's difficult, but they do produce a good amount of accuracy. There's a lot that goes into that. I'm like trying to think of what would be appropriate for you guys, but yeah.
Are they used very often in settings like ours?
Probably not as often as settings as yours, no. Especially like, I don't know where everyone works, but if it's like a quick interaction or, like a lot of times you'll see this, like if it's big conferences, you see that a lot there. Post-secondary arenas, lecture halls, you'll see them. So it's,
We're actually using the CART service for conducting our interviews.
Oh, good. Yeah, yeah.
So that was another option, but it does cost about $120 an hour.
It's not cheap. You definitely have to have, like I said, a skilled person to run it. And it also, the consumer has to have an English knowledge. You know, if someone comes in and they don't have a strong English language, a lot of times this is not going to be the best scenario for them if they're not able to keep up with what is being put out on the screen. Does that make sense? Okay, interpreters. It's important. An interpreter should be certified in order to work. There's the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, the RID. Anyone can go on there and see there's a list of certified interpreters for each state. These are all sorts of different certifications that you can get. The National Association for the Deaf, there's 5 different levels that you can get as certification. There's state quality assessment. I don't think Montana has one as of yet. They do have the EIPA, the Educational Interpreters Performance Assessment, which is required to be a 3.5 or above. Or a National Interpreter Certification, which once you get that, you are free to interpret throughout the United States. So again, if you're looking for a certified interpreter, the Registry of Interpreters will be a great place to start. And I can give you some of these slides too. So if anyone, do you want me to go back to that slide? I see you writing still. Do you want me to go back?
I got it.
Okay. And I'll provide these for everyone too. So an interpreter must provide linguistic equivalency. It is part of their job is to match the speaker as well So they have to take that information from that speaker, put it out on their hands. They also have to be able to read what that deaf client is giving back. So it's, being an interpreter is pretty demanding. You know, you've got a lot going on. You've got to take what they, and ASL has its own grammatical structure. So you're taking one language in a certain structure, turning it around and putting it on your hands so that that deaf client can understand what's being said. Again, two-way street that language is, so you have to have an expressive component as well as a receptive component. So you got to be able to see what's being said off that signer's hand and be able to voice for them. You know, you have to be able to voice accurately. Nothing's worse than having an interpreter that has no ability to give back. You know, you have to be able to have a match for what is being said for that person. Vocal tone and inflection changes the meaning. You also have to be able to express that through sign language. You know, you can easily say, I will say because it is hot in here, like, oh, it is hot in here. So I'm kind of implying, someone can open that window, that would be great. So, but never was I said, hey, can someone open the window? But the way I said it kind of implies, so you have to be able to take that, hear what is being implied from the tone of the voices, and put that out on your hand. So not only are you listening to the content, but you also have to take in the tone, the person's, you know, if they're sarcastic or snarky, you have to be able to put that out so that the deaf person can understand. You know, if someone's like, oh, you got your hair cut today, you know, you can obviously tell that maybe it's not my favorite cut. So I'd have to be able to put that on my hand so that the deaf person knows why that person is mad at me for saying that. So there's just a lot of action that's going on. You have to know what the intent of the speaker is. It's always nice to have some background information before going into an assignment. You know, I know that I personally, if I was called into like an engineering class, I've got zero background knowledge in engineering, so it would be very hard for me to go in and interpret accurately. So the more information that you get before a job, the better of an interpretation you can provide for both the hearing participant and the deaf client. Pacing, pausing, all kind of governed rule parts of language. There's cultural considerations. ASL in the deaf community, it's kind of funny. A lot of people can, you know, they are not shy on using physical descriptors when talking about people. So, you know, a lot of times they'd be like, oh, that woman, or, you know, the big one. And it's completely acceptable in their culture, and that's how they do things. A lot of times they give name signs on your physical looks. So gotta keep cultural considerations in mind. And you always have to find those implied and hidden meanings in all messages. We all have to do it. We do it, you know, as second nature, but as an interpreter, you have to be able to pick out what those hidden messages are so that the deaf person can be right there on the same page. Make sense? So again, managing communication, you need some comprehension from your first language. All of our first language is English, that's our L1. To be able to put it into L2, which would be sign language, it could be Spanish, French. Again, familiarity of the materials. We all interpreters have a code of conduct, a code of ethics that we all have to live by. The speed and processing time, you gotta be able to correct information as you go. There's a lot going on every time an interpretation takes place. So turn taking, team practicing is really nice. Anything that's usually more than 2 hours long, you'll see a team interpreter team interpreters going on, so it's nice to give that back and forth. I mean, it's physically demanding, it's mentally draining, it's exhausting. So if you got a big assignment, I would recommend finding 2 interpreters for the sake of those individuals interpreting. The physical environment, fatigue. You'll see a lot of interpreters, they will end up getting carpal tunnel from repeated motions, and so yeah, fatigue. This one's probably the most important one. When you do have a deaf consumer that comes in, just speak directly to the deaf person. There's the interpreter there. A lot of times the interpreter will stand next to the hearing person so that the deaf person can, look for you and your facial expressions, and look for your body language, and then come back to the interpreter, get the message, back and forth. So just always speak to that person as a person. Qualified interpreters, the ADA, this is what they consider as a qualified interpreter. This one's for the court systems. Then there's different qualifications for when you do. There's a certain certification for court systems and insurance. I recommend having both of those, because you never know when, like I said before, you can, I didn't understand that interpretation. But that's just, again, qualifications. An interpreter should, bless you. Yeah, interpreter should have a degree. So someone who's interpreting that has a high school graduate compared to someone who's got a post-secondary education, they just have a bigger, we call them toolboxes, because life experiences, schooling, all of those things that go into the toolboxes that have that knowledge, that pre-existing idea of what's going on. Certifications, there's all different kind of certifications. There's minimum standards, like that for educational purposes, there's the 3.5 to be an educational interpreter. Quality assurance, we have to adhere to the code of ethics and professional conduct, and we always have to go get our continuing educations. So there's always that saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. You've always got to be keeping up sharp, knowing what's going on, keeping your pulse on what's going on in the interpreting field. And we're always here for you. If you ever have any, we offer a lot of different trainings and resources, so it may be, Robin, you took the one.
Yes.
Access the Fundamentals. It's a great training. It kind of just gives an idea of what it's like to be working with deaf and hard of hearing individuals and just hearing loss in general. So it's always a nice one to take. But anytime you have any questions, we have some help at pepnet.cards. We've got a technical assistance team that have a live chat, and we're always available for any questions that you might have related to deaf and hard of hearing. We can't fix all the world problems. So, and then here's our addresses too. Great. Oh yeah, question.
I do have a question. If you're giving a lecture or interacting with a senior group where a third of them at least probably are hard of hearing, what's the best practice in that interaction?
Yeah, so you've got like a handful of people?
Maybe up to 100.
Oh.
About
Wow,
25 to 100.
That is a very good question that I'm going to have to just think about, because I want to give you the best practice, and I don't want to just give you what I think. Who cares what I think? We need the best practice. If I could email you, we can be in contact.
Okay.
Because yeah, we can definitely come up with something that would be suitable. I'm sure. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? Is there any other questions? Well, thank you so much for coming. I know this is pretty warm.
Thank you, and thank you for adapting so quickly. And everybody wants to know, I will send around these when Carrie sends them to me, the slides. And I will also send out the PepNet with some suggestions for the basic classes or the little online trainings. And they're pretty short little things that are just kind of good that talk about like kind of real-time interaction. And I will also ask Carrie and Mary to share some more videos, kind of like, that was a request from the last one, like the one, like maybe somebody working with a sign language interpreter or something. So we'll have some information to share after this. And then I just want you to know if you have any input for me and the people and Ellen and the other managers who are going to be working on kind of creating some policies and resource lists and all that kind of stuff, please let me know, because I personally haven't had any experience needing to use it in the field where you guys have, so I appreciate it a lot. So, okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Please, you can just leave on the table your evaluation sheets. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna run to the bathroom.